And it was because I was in a show there, and because there was a big retrospective of Louis Kahn at the same time in the museum. So they asked me to talk about my connection to, or like my work's connection to his. And for those of you who don't know Louis Kahn, he was an American architect who died in '74 under quite weird circumstances. We might get to that if we have time. He was an immigrant who lived in Philadelphia, and most of his work until quite late in life was done in Philadelphia. And he was in some ways very, very famous, but at the same time, not really. I mean, he was certainly not as kind of recognized as Corbusier or something like this, but he was kind of maybe more like an architect's architect. And I've divided the talk into like some different parts, where in the beginning I'm going to start talking about like specific kind of qualities about his architecture. And in order to kind of highlight the kind of qualities that I was interested in, I made a bunch of collages of his, or like of reproductions of his work, just to, you know, as this is like my normal kind of modus operandi. Whenever I want something, I make a collage out of it. So I have dug up like a whole bunch of images, and then I have made some changes to this talk. And then in the end, we're then going to talk about only like one body of work of mine. When I gave this talk originally, we were then standing like in a room that had like a big kind of display unit structure that I had built. So it was kind of like easier to actually imagine like why and how I was somehow like interested in Louis Kahn. So, but we would just have to make do without that. There are like some parts of Louis Kahn's production that people like instantly recognize. One is the use of geometry, and the other one is the use of light, like natural light in the buildings. Then it's the differences between built and unbuilt space, which was also very important for him. Then monumentality is something that he was actually very good at, and he also gave several talks. He was also teaching at Yale at one point, and he talked about this a lot. Monumentality, light, shadow, space, silence. We're going to get to some of these things later on. And then here I have then taken like a whole bunch of the images, and I've essentially like cut out specific parts to highlight like what kind of light that actually came through the buildings. And we're just going to go through like a whole bunch of these like relatively quickly. Here, for instance, one of the most like famous buildings he ever built was the Salk Institute in La Jolla in California, which is this one, which I have now like massacred and reassembled to my own liking. And this is also from La Jolla. Here, for instance, beautiful use of natural light and openings in the space. He did at least like two really, really important kind of trips quite early in his career to Europe, where he traveled for like months at a time. And on one of them, he went to Italy for a long time and made drawings of like vernacular architecture in Italy, and also like to Egypt, among other places. And this is quite important because like vernacular architecture is essentially a type of architecture that doesn't have an architect. So it's a non-pedigree architecture, something that is more like a building tradition more than a specific design. And before the notion of an architect actually existed, this was how buildings were made. They were made by craftspeople. For instance, you have the famous building Katsutra in outside of Tokyo, which, or like it's not one building, it's like 6 or 7 buildings. And it's the imperial home, or used to be the imperial home. And there was a monk who laid the plan for the whole area. And then from there on, like all the different carpenters or you know, roof layers or whatever, they knew how to make things good and solid. So nobody actually designed how it was made, it was just built. and nobody really made any decisions down to like details. Like every single kind of joint or whatever like nail was put in there was put there because the workers knew how to do it, and they had been doing this for hundreds of years, and this is how kind of the tradition then developed. And Kahn was very interested in this kind of architecture, also because it meant like a specific kind of function to history, or like an interest in history, which for him was very important. And even though he's considered a modernist, he doesn't really quite fit into this kind of category either. I mean, it's certainly like modern works, but they hark back to something that's much more like archaic in some ways. The use of geometry, for instance, is something you also find like in Persian or like North African vernacular architecture. And his, like, I mean, his kind of leading stars were like Roman architecture and things that he saw and drew in Italy. And he went to Italy also to make like drawings. So I have also like some pictures of this. He was originally, I think he kind of wanted to be an artist, so he kept like making paintings and drawings his whole life, and exhibited paintings and shows and stuff, but ended up then like building more than anything. Early in his career, he worked with city planning and city development, which meant that he was actually like Philadelphia was like the place to go if you were interested in urbanism in the 60s. So this was actually like the biggest kind of developments in urbanism and city planning was done in Philadelphia. And beautiful. I've also been there, and it's an absolutely like stunning, some of the plans that he drew up. Not all of it was really built, but in the end it was like he made some real differences actually in the city. So here we have like one drawing on the right hand side that he made in Italy. I've made a little bit of a drawing on top of it as well, just to kind of emphasize like specific kind of geometric shapes. This is somehow like the beginning of one of the aspects that I wanted to kind of highlight in this talk. Because there's a very famous text by Louis Kahn, because he was giving lectures nearly just as much as he was building buildings. And one of the most famous one is called Silence and Light. And he uses those two words as something that's not quite, nobody really knows exactly what he meant with those two words. They certainly had like a kind of metaphysical sort of meaning to him, but they also meant like very kind of specific light, like on a surface. This is what makes architecture, like no architecture without light. But when I was researching this originally, I started also to see like how light actually defines form and like how it defines sculptures, for instance. So there is like a whole, I've dug out like a whole set of things that relates to this. This is Michelangelo, which is actually like a part, like obviously also like built space, like architectural space, integrated with sculptural space. But in order for this to function, he needs to play with like light and shadow, for instance. So in this case, like then light and shadow really generates the form that we are looking at. And we can see it even more here. I've darkened and lit some of them so you can see like a little bit kind of clearer how this actually kind of comes out. And these arches that we have in the back there is something that also me, like personally, I've been very interested in, because this is actually something that renders the sculptural two-dimensional. Because suddenly there is only like a frontal view that, and this is the only thing we can see. It's not really any longer like a three-dimensional piece, which is ironic, I imagine, somehow. Yeah. So here we have them again. And I mean, Kahn actually talks about light, that the shadow also belongs to light, so that there is no, there's no light without shadow, and vice versa. And this is all kind of very weird, and somehow maybe also like it comes maybe down to the fact that he wasn't a native English speaker, I mean, he was born in Estland, but his parents moved to Philadelphia when he was about 5 or 6. I mean, he certainly like spoke English fluently, but it could also be that because of this, he had like he made up words, and there were like all this kind of rambling going on when he had a lecture. But he also talks about like light being like a necessity for the buildings to function, and that there were like, again, there are no built space without light. Like you would never see anything if there's no light there. But he also says that the structure is the maker of light, which is also somehow contradictory. And here, for instance, again, we have like examples of how he brought those kind of things into the buildings. This is a piece of vernacular architecture from North Africa. Exactly where it is and when it was made, I don't really know. But here you also, of course, like these are buildings built under a condition where you have a lot of light and strong light, like all year round. So that's something where it fits actually quite perfectly. This is from Jaipur, India. This is actually celestial architecture, even though that shouldn't really exist. But this is a star and a sun observatory that they wanted to build. Again, this is like a vernacular architecture. There's no real designer behind it. But they then apparently had like models of instruments to measure the stars and suns and stuff. And they wanted to scale it up to like something that was essentially like a small city, except that when they had built everything, and that took something like 20 years, it didn't work. So it was quite like useless. And I don't know what happened, if it was in the scaling that somehow they weren't really, precise enough or whatever happened, but it's just decoration, essentially. It's really beautiful though. And this is a sculpture. Again, this is then a vernacular one from Angola. And here, I don't know if you can really see this, but these are like two, this is one like watercolor that Kahn did in Italy, in Florence, where I've darkened one of them so that you can kind of get like a better kind of feel for how he then saw these two arches and developed sort of the shadow underneath it. And this is another one with a picture of a postcard that he sent to, well, Suan Khan. The thing with him was that he also had at least 2 families, and they didn't really know each other. And there were like all kinds of trouble with these things. But for the opening in Oslo, like his kids came, and one of his sons, the youngest one from the second family, he made a really, really beautiful documentary film about his father, whom he knew only when he was a child, but Louis Kahn was like traveling all the time, and somehow, I mean, he also had another family. So, and he was, I think, quite technically, he was married to 2 women at the same time. Quite a character. And this is another drawing that he did also. This is from Italy. Here you can also see like how he kind of develops the architecture and develops the form and develops the geometry through the light and shadow. This is from a very beautiful project in Trenton, New Jersey, called Jewish Bathhouse. This is like a quite standard Greek cross-section. This place actually doesn't really exist any longer because, I don't know, wasn't really maintained. This is like one of his earliest projects, actually. Here is another Persian architecture. And here we have Louis Kahn. One of the most interesting things about him, maybe like for us, is that he built a lot of museums. And some of them are considered to be like the most fantastic museums, actually, like in the world. This is from the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. And then he built 2 museums for Yale. The one called Yale Center for Art and the one called Yale Center for British Art. And they are absolutely magnificent buildings. I mean, they're like, in terms of like showing artworks, they are probably like the top 5 or something. So he was quite clever, and like, this is from the Yale center of arts. I have darkened this quite a bit just to show kind of what kind of like atmosphere it is. He made a structural floor, and then one side is only glass, which lets all the light in, but the rest of the building is basically completely compact and doesn't let any kind of light in. That was actually his first big commission. This is from the same place. And this is from the Kimball. And there he built this kind of like archways that have, that lets light in, but it gets reflected in kind of reflectors underneath the arches. Then we're going to shortly like talk about some of the like historical things that he looked at, and things that probably like interested him. I mean, some of this is, I have to say, was a kind of speculation, because of course like nobody really interviewed him about like what in history he was really interested in. But this is Ledoux, French utopian architect. This is from a volume of like published engravings that he did at some point. A lot of the things that he designed was never built, because he was quite visionary to a certain extent, but also quite a difficult guy, apparently, to handle. He was in prison for a long time, and he had a rather troubled life. But this is from a salt mine, so there are actually some of the things there was built. The big ball that you're seeing there is actually meant to be a guard tower, because in order to produce the salt, they needed firewood. So they had workers or slaves, maybe more, who then worked like all the fields, and this was then in the center, and this was like a panopticon, so you could see like all the workers in the woods, making sure that they were working. And then they brought it in, and then salt was brought out of the water, I imagine, and the plans that he made for the city is absolutely spectacular. There's things that you wouldn't believe that somebody would dream up this stuff. And some of it still stands, so it's actually possible to go and see it. So here is another one, just to kind of showcase it together with Louis Kahn. Here we have again the Persian architecture. Actually, we have the mouse here. This is also Persian. Beautiful, beautiful buildings. And here we have, like, in the lower part there, we see the Institute of Management that he built in India. This was like one of his last commissions that before he died. I can tell you then shortly how he died. He was on his way back from India, and for some reason decided to go and have a heart attack or some kind of ailment in the men's toilet at Penn Station in New York. And before he died, he dropped all his papers, he had no identification, nothing. So for some reason, at least this is the speculation, is that he knew, or somehow he felt that he was about to die, and just, I don't know, dropped all the stuff. And it took days before they figured out who he was, but they eventually then called a tailor of his suit, and the tailor then recognized the cut and the suit, and then they could identify it. Yep, that's how it goes. There he is again in his tailored suit. Yeah. These are also from Persian architecture. These are drawings of fortifications from Michelangelo. This is another one of his drawings. This is the Giotto chapel, where there's also a very interesting kind of combination of built and unbuilt space, or imagined space and actual space. If you ever go to the chapel, this is one of the things that everybody should do at least once in their lifetime. It's an absolutely stunning experience, but you can only be in there for 15 minutes because of climate control. So you got 15 minutes to really soak it up. It's an absolutely amazing place. Here's another picture of it. And yet another. This is again Michelangelo. Here I also darkened one of them so you can kind of see a little bit better what's actually happening in the forum. Here again. All right. What I also want to say about like Louis Kahn is that like when he died, he had something like 17 like big projects that he was working on, which by any rate means that he was an extraordinarily successful architect, even though he didn't have like any money and like his whole life was kind of like a chaos. He was quite recognized at that point, and he was teaching a lot, he was lecturing a lot, and maybe one of the reasons why it also took him so long, or like why he had so many projects going on at that time, was that he would draw and draw and draw and draw. He was never really finished with a project. There is the FDR memorial on Roosevelt Island, which was recently opened, I think like 2 years ago, that he started designing on in 61, I think, and then again in 74, he had another go at it, and then eventually then, well, 2012 or something, I guess, it was open. So, like, there's also the Dominican Mother House, which he designed like maybe 15 years or something he was working on it, and he could never really finish. It wasn't necessarily that the clients weren't happy, it was him. He wasn't happy, and he just kept designing and designing and designing. So that's basically it about Louis Kahn. And then I'm going to talk about like one specific group of works of mine. And the reason why I included this in the lecture in the first place at the National Museum was that I was asked to like see if like how you know like how would you approach like a modernist architect today as an artist. And my first thought was then not so much in the kind of formal sense, even though there are like things that overlap there as well, but more in the way of doing research or like a specific way of thinking or a specific methodology. So this work, it's called Never Ending Memory, and it's a sculpture, but it's also my archive. So everything I do and everything I have been doing the last 10, 12 years, I collected, and then it gets glued on to these like MDF plates, and then it gets put into the archive. And then whenever it's necessary, I add another floor to the sculpture. So the idea is that this is then just going to continue to grow until it's so big and heavy that I can't really move it around any longer, and then I start another tower. And if that's then going to look identical, I haven't really decided yet, because I still think I'm like a couple of years away from having to do that. But the idea is that I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my life. So depending, of course, how long my life is, but at one point, I hope that it's going to be like a room with these kind of towers. And even if I never really had any kind of clever thoughts in my whole life, at least it's all, you know, collected and registered, and somehow you can walk in there and you can go through like everything I ever thought about. And I mean literally everything. I don't really edit anything. Sometimes there are things that are completely, like even for me, I don't really understand what it is. So then I try to kind of figure it out and maybe make like a small note or something, because there's like a lot of meta information in this kind of thing that gets lost easily. But it's all kinds of like notes for ideas and documentation, Polaroids, sketches, instructions for work. Sometimes there are that. Everything, straight in there. And the thing is, like I have, great. Where was I? Yeah, so I haven't really had like time and energy always to work as much with this material as I wanted to. So I have like boxes and boxes and boxes of things that still needs to be kind of prepared and put in there. At one point I was in New York for about a year, so then I couldn't really bring the archive with me. And then as a kind of solution for this, I started making this kind of handmade books instead that served the same purpose, but they were kind of limited in terms of time. So whenever I knew for certain I was going to do an exhibition, I would start making one of these books. And the books are always, instead of like normal paper, I use photos. Because when I was an art student, actually at one point I was at 0ysteinmpeg, but I went there only twice and I never really studied much, so maybe I shouldn't mention that. But then I had like some small grants, and to travel in Europe and take pictures of of modern architecture, which was something I was very interested in. And I made like all these big prints because in Norway we had like machines to do all the printing, and I never showed it to anyone because it was, as pictures, it was quite useless. But as book paper, it was very useful. So I then pasted all kinds of like stuff on these images, which meant that like whenever I started to think about an exhibition, it would always, by default, have this kind of connection to architecture and built space and these kinds of things, which was things that I was already interested in. So that it was a quite like kind of like natural move. Now I've also sometimes like started taking like pictures of my work in the studio, and then I print this and I use this for the book pages. So I kind of double up on the process and make it like yet another kind of investigation of the work that already exists. Sometimes I also take pictures of work that I'm about to destroy, because I have a tendency to do that when things are like around in the studio too long. I don't really want to keep it. So then I take a picture of it, because then it's forever, right? I mean, that's why I make pictures. This is just another view of the thing. And these are, for instance, like then two examples of two plates. Sometimes like these things are, you know, very prosaic. I mean, it could be like a sentence or a word or something like this. Sometimes I can go back now and I can see like, oh wow, you know, like, did I really think about this already back then? Because let me then go back a little while maybe, and then the reason why I started doing this was that I realized that when you have ideas, first of all, they are never really that well developed. So an idea really needs a lot of work before it actually functions as anything. And quite often I also realized that when I had an idea, it didn't quite fit what I was working on at the moment. And I needed a system to make sure that these ideas were kept, because later on it would actually function. And then like the kind of condition for like making the work would actually be there. And then you needed like a loop or like a playback system that made sure that like those kind of ideas didn't get lost in the process. Which also meant that in the moment I implemented this archive, I always had like a system to generate ideas. And the reason for this is that the archive is actually not structured in any kind of way. And of course that sounds completely silly when you think that I'm supposed to do this for my whole life, and at the end, already now I can't find anything. But this is exactly the point, because like whenever I need to find something, I need to look through large parts of the archive. And that means that I always kind of, you know, cross-read things, and like new things are developed, or like maybe you look at something and you can't really, and you don't really know the original reason for why you drew this or like wrote this down, and you make up something. You know, I mean, that's a quite natural reaction. It's very human. And then you know, suddenly you have a new idea. And so this is actually like a guarantee that I'm not going to run out of ideas anytime soon. You know. Which also means that there's quite a lot of work involved with this, you know. I mean, this is something I had to do basically like on a like weekly basis. But still, it's a really good tool to always like keep all the things that you're thinking about available, but still at the same time like generate memory. So I think of it. I mean, one thing, of course, is that it has an archival function. But it also has a generative function, so like it's really like it's a very good tool for my like everyday work. And the idea with the handmade books is that then when they are finished, they are usually shown together with the like in the exhibition. Then I take pictures of the different book pages, and they go then back into the archive. So like also this then gets kind of taken care of. The funny thing actually with the handmade books is that also then of course I go through like all the ideas and all the thoughts and everything for like every exhibition, but that then it's already there. So which means that like if there's something I don't really like, I can just skip it as actual works because it's already kind of explained like in the handmade book. And if this is then shown, people can look through it, and it's not that it's really like a manual or any kind of sort, because it's too abstract for that. But at least like all the things that I thought of was taken care of, and that gives me like a carte blanche to do whatever fuck I want, basically, like with the rest of the exhibition. So it's a very good kind of tool also for this. So here are like some more older drawings, Polaroid documentation. It's an early drawing where I apparently want to lift the roof. Copies. Sometimes I also put in like, you know, things that I copy from like books and things like that. Whatever really. Here, definitions. This is apparently everything I needed to say about allegory and subversion. That was it. This is actually a work, but in the end I put it in there because I was very interested in years ago, interested in André Malraux and in Abu Wabuk, naturally in a way, because this is all like related to like archives and like museums and display and all these kind of things. And I had this project, and whenever I went to a new city, I went to a library and I ripped out some of the pages of Museum Without Walls. And my plan was to just keep on doing this because I couldn't really steal the whole book, but I could steal 2 pages without any problems. So this is actually 2 of those pages, I think. Yeah, that's a good OS. And this is actually like the first drawing from the Louis Kahn show. So where I actually then decided that I wanted to kind of divide up a pyramid. Yeah, so essentially it contains all these kind of pieces, broken bed. This is something I never actually did, but somehow like it's a very nice little drawing. And this is also like a very important reference to my work, actually, the Elitsitsky display rooms. This was for a drawing for a sculpture in 2004, I think, for a show in France. Barrier. That's a good word. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, so the archive actually has like a couple of rules. Like one of them is that it can never be finished unless I die, obviously. And then it can never leave my studio. But I do put it in exhibitions sometime. So once for my first exhibition with Sabina here, which was in a different location, so it was kind of around the corner from my studio then. So then people, for instance, they could make appointments with the gallery and they could come and see it. And this worked actually quite nice. I mean, not that many people showed up, but that's all right. And I at least like had a feeling that they thought it was very personal or private in some kind of way, which it isn't at all, because this is like, there's really no private stuff in there. I mean, it's really only related to work. But I don't know, maybe this whole kind of setting of coming to someone's home and like pulling out these plates or somehow like something that made it feel private. And then, yeah, so it can never really leave my studio. And hopefully then, eventually, like it will be then like a huge kind of back catalog of like everything that I thought of. All right. We have time for some quick questions, don't we? Yeah. If there are any. Well, the physical archive I started in 2006, and the material goes back to 2001, I think, or 2002 maybe. I finished studying in 2003. Yeah, 2003. So some material is from like the last couple of years when I was a student. And the physical thing, 2006. Then I rebuilt everything when I came back from New York. I took it all apart and really remade the whole thing. But it's in the same blueprint, so it's essentially the same kind of structure, just built new. Yep.
And the pages that you put into these handmade books, do you put them back into the archive?
Yeah, I take pictures of the handmade books, or like of each page, and then the picture goes back into the archive, which is not really ideal, because originally when I started making the archive in itself, then I was considering doing something like this, like do the whole archive as a kind of only reproductions. But then you come in, then suddenly you have like a photo reproduction, like all these kind of discourses, and this was not part of it. I didn't really want to have anything to do with this. You know? I wanted like the real, actual materials. So it is kind of problematic in a way.
Are you then behind? Like, do you collect the things and not put them into the archive to still be able to decide to put it into the book instead of doing it onto this place so you can remove it?
No, actually no. I mean, usually I work on the book on the books in kind of periods. So I would have set aside like a couple of hours, like every week or something, and go through like all the material I've done during the week. But of course, like nobody ever works on one project at the time. So like all the other things, for instance, you know, they go then like straight into the archive, and then only the things concerning that specific exhibition goes into the book. Yeah, if that answered the question.
Do you feel like limited sometimes because of the format of the pages?
Sure, I do.
Sometimes maybe it's also a limitation because you can go.
Yeah, I mean, of course, at this point, I know that where it's going, and I know that it can be a little bit larger than A4, but not really, you know.
Yeah, but you have the trick to do photos, so if you want.
Yes, I can do that, like as a last step. But no, I mean that is certainly like I mean, the thing is like mostly like when I have an idea, it's usually like something I write down, so it doesn't really necessarily have to be like a big drawing, you know. Sometimes I make more like floor plans and things like that. I mean, like instructions for building something. But I don't really make drawings, like large drawings. So usually it's sufficient, but yeah, there is, at least now there is like this awareness that it can't really be much bigger.
Would you put like a DVD or a CD inside? Option, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, why not? Sure. Sure. Actually, I did, like years ago, I did a series of works called Bootleg Series, which was actually like mass production of CDs, where I took, whenever for instance, I had a show in Brussels, and then I dug up like a bootleg recording of a concert of an artist that I liked in Brussels from the 70s or something like this, and then I mass produced it and made a sculpture that people could then take like the CDs. So I have actually like an archive of CDs because I did, I don't know, 6 or 7 of those works, I think, altogether. And then I would usually make like a sculpture based maybe on the floor plans of the concert hall or something like this, you know. So they were all, in a way, not really site-specific, but kind of site-sensitive, at least, you know, somehow. Yeah. So I wouldn't, I would put in that too, I think, if it was feasible somehow.
Do you think that at some point, when it's part of the work on your own archive, that this could become such a huge time thing that it's like you developing yourself or something?
Well, I do it kind of already. So yes, I think this is going to be a huge problem. Yeah, in some ways, because like this is something that's it's gonna slide into entropy at one point. I mean, at one point it's going to be complete chaos, and the problem is also that there are like a lot of things here that were interesting for me to think about, but at one point I'm going to start to forget. I mean, even if I create this as kind of like a second memory, my memory is clearly not going to, you know, be sufficient at some point. Yes. So I had a meeting with a museum from Tokyo a while back, and then she said, but you need to like hire someone who's going to be with you for the rest of your life, who sits there, you know, and you tell her or him what this is, you know, and then they pass the information along. Because this is actually what, like, I mean, this is one of the options you actually have, like that you have someone who's going to make like a lifelong commitment. So if, you know, and anyone who want to volunteer, please let me know. So far it's a register, because as long as it's been worked with, it's actually not an archive. But it will be. That's like one of the things, few things we can say for sure. Yeah. Vlado?
I have many questions. I don't know where to start from.
Okay.
One time, for example, you get an invitation now from Documenta to exhibit the archive, but you say that you will not exhibit it.
Mm-hmm.
Or that it may be exhibited after you die, or I don't know where the plan is. But
No.
in this case, you remember, for example, we have a Trichter's Atlas.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's also a possibility. So that you exclude, so you
Yeah.
completely deny this possibility. Or the part that people Documenta should come to your studio. I don't know how you plan it, for example.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've, this is the solution I've had before, and one of the things that I have been thinking of now is like how you can like if there are like ways to kind of transform this in some kind of way, you know, like make some kind of a representation of it. But I don't really have any good answers for that actually, because I don't really know. This is something that I need more time, and I need more kind of, I need to think about this much more. I mean, it could be that like certain things of it could be reproduced, or that you can make, I don't know, at one point I wanted to make a book about it, for instance, when it was 10 years old. And that's, you know, that's an option, that you make something like that. But the physical archive is a working tool, and it needs to remain in my studio. So this is kind of, yeah. Documenta or not, that's how it is.
See that in Documenta too, where artist studios are also moved to Documenta, where the artists live there and work there.
Wow, I mean, that's probably a solution, but yeah, I don't know.
On the other side,
Would be
it's
so
kind of a bit scary, because this register or archive is kind of a brain.
Yeah, it is, totally.
And it is growing and growing.
Yeah.
At one point, it's also really scary that just one small mistake, or a colleague smoking a cigarette or something, start a fire.
Yeah.
That would burn it.
Yeah, it's really true. Yeah, it's really
You
true.
just mentioned that it could be also in a way digitalized, or it could be in a way backup, as we tend to say.
Yeah.
What the possibilities are. You have also a good internet presence, but it is basically presenting just your artwork, but not your archive of ideas and possibilities, inspiration walls.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I mean, I have scans, I think, like of most of the plates, for instance, but of course, like the originals are then still invaluable. I mean, this is something I can't even sign an insurance policy for that, so that doesn't really, we just have to make sure that nobody smokes around it, I suppose.
You would not open it. Let's say that, for example, that we have kind of the sculptures here in the center, that you have a lot of pages around the wall, kind of like an inspiration wall for everyone.
No, not really. I think I would. I mean, no, I really prefer it to be in my studio somehow. And I mean, then it's perfectly fine. I mean, I think it's really nice when people are there and they're looking at the archive and they're pulling things out. And the thing is, like, also the way it's constructed is that you would kind of naturally only pull like one plate out at a time. Like maybe I would take out several and kind of put them together, but like a visitor, for some reason, would only take like one, look at that, put it back in again, take out another one, you know, da-da. So it's very concentrated and it's very intimate in some ways, because you're looking at something like, you know, you're holding it in your hands. It's very physical. And this you lose, I think, like in the moment you would try to make an exhibition out of it, for instance. You know. It's like having a photo book compared to looking at photos on a wall. You know.
I think that what you lose is rather this intimate character, because basically what happens is that you just exhibit this very personal, private, intimate moments. And you just make it kind of like an exhibitionist.
Yeah, there has been some questions about that actually, but mostly for the handmade books. because they were like some of them have been like in museums and stuff, and then I have to do usually I have to then do this kind of tour with press or whatever, like people working in the museum, and you have to explain what you're doing. And then they are always surprised and say, like most artists, they don't want to talk about this. You know, they don't want to show the things that they thought of that wasn't really good enough for, you know, like all the kind of background for like making an artwork. But actually, I don't mind that. Really, not at all. I think it's good. Get it out in the open, then it's it's out there. And if people steal ideas from it, fine. Like that's all.
How far is it accessible? So if someone the students would like, out of this interest for this talk, to come and take a look?
Sure, yeah. I do that all the time. I mean, they're like, usually if people are interested in it, they talk to Sabine, and then we set up a visit, basically. So absolutely, it's all open. Yeah. Any more questions?
Did you ever have like an idea that you put in the archive, and afterwards you would like to remove the idea? But are you like, there's an idea and you don't like the idea anymore, so you don't want the idea to be part of it anymore? So are you so free to take it away one more time, or need it to be inside of the archive forever?
It needs to be there forever. Even if I'm ashamed of it, it needs to be there. So no, I really don't edit in that regard at all. I mean, of course, I can always pretend that I don't remember what it is, but it needs to be there. So yeah, and I mean, of course, like not every idea is super great. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, and very often ideas needs a lot of work before they actually get to be good ideas. So that's perfectly fine. Actually, it's more like the other way around. That sounds very like self-inflating, but sometimes I look at things that I had completely forgotten, and I thought like, wow, that was actually not such a stupid thing. Thank you, and thank you for coming.